February 7, 1981. In a region of Antarctica where the sun disappears for months at a time, refusing to acknowledge human existence, an international research mission was underway. Under Project Black Ice, a massive tracked mobile base unit Omega-12 moved slowly across an endless ocean of frozen white. This was no ordinary vehicle. Omega-12 was a moving fortress of steel. Inside were research laboratories, sleeping quarters, an engine deck, and a central control room. A total of 18 people were on board, 11 scientists, 4 survival-trained technical experts, 1 medical doctor, 1 communications officer, and the mission leader, Captain Richard Hall. Hall was a man who had survived both the Arctic and Antarctica. His face carried more hardness than the weather itself. Accompanying the team were 2 experienced sled dogs, Nova and Black, trained to sense dangers hidden beneath the ice. The mission objective was clear: to reach a remote interior zone of Antarctica where satellite data suggested the presence of a massive subglacial lake buried deep beneath the ice, a lake no human had ever seen. For the first 10 days, everything went according to plan. Data collection, ice core sampling, terrain mapping. Laughter echoed inside the base. Some wrote in journals. Others spoke quietly about home. But on the 11th night, at exactly 2:36 a.m., everything changed. A violent tremor surged from beneath Omega-12, tearing everyone from their sleep. It felt as if the ice itself had groaned in pain. Alarms screamed. Red warning lights flooded the control panels. An engineer shouted, "Ground stability is failing." Before anyone could fully react, a massive section of ice collapsed without warning. The front half of Omega-12 lurched violently and slammed to a stop, hanging at the edge of a deep glacial cavity. The entire base tilted sharply. People were thrown into walls. Equipment shattered. The doctor immediately began treating the injured. Captain Hall stepped outside, and what he saw froze his blood. Cracks stretched in every direction. The ice beneath them was shifting, breathing. This was not normal terrain. The radio was activated. An SOS signal was sent. The only response was static. It was as if this place had been completely cut off from the world. For the next 6 hours they tried everything to stabilize and free the base. But every movement caused the ice to fracture even more. Finally, Captain Hall made the hardest decision of his career. Omega-12 was no longer safe. They would have to abandon it and set up a temporary camp on the surface. Only essential supplies were retrieved. Food rations for 25 days, tents, medical equipment, limited fuel, flares, and survival gear. When they stepped outside, Antarctica revealed its true face. -49 degrees Celsius, razor-sharp winds, an endless white void. For the first 2 days, morale held. They believed satellites were tracking their position. Rescue would come. On the 3rd day, the communications officer quietly delivered devastating news. Their beacon signal was dead. On the 4th day, the first argument broke out over food. On the 5th day, one of the scientists began to mentally unravel, repeatedly claiming he could hear voices beneath the ice. Nova wouldn't stop barking in a single direction, as if sensing something deeply wrong. On the 7th day, a brutal blizzard hit, destroying whatever planning they had left. Winds were so powerful they tore tents from the ground. In the darkness, one technician became disoriented and vanished. By morning, his frozen body was found. It was their first death. And in that moment, everyone understood. This mission was no longer about discovery. It was about survival. Rations were reduced, and the ice was still watching. Conversation slowly faded inside the camp. People began to withdraw into their own fear. That night, Captain Richard Hall wrote only a single line in his journal: "We are alone here." And somewhere far below the ice, Omega-12, buried and forgotten, was taking its final breaths. After the base was lost beneath the ice, each passing day at the camp was no longer measured by calendar dates, but by the limits of the human body and mind. By the end of the 8th day, the wind shifted direction and the temperature dropped even further. At minus 55 degrees Celsius, every breath felt like needles stabbing the lungs from the inside. People spoke less now, not out of choice, but because even speaking required energy they could no longer spare. Every morning, Captain Hall did the same two things. First, he counted heads. Then he checked the rations. And silently asked himself the same question: will everyone survive today? For Dr. Allison, the situation was becoming unbearable. Injuries increased every day while medical supplies steadily disappeared. The first signs of frostbite began to appear, fingers and toes turning pale blue, then black. On the 9th day, meteorologist Julian warned that multiple severe storms were likely in the coming days. If that happened, the camp would not survive. That same night, Nova suddenly began barking violently, clawing at the ice beneath her paws as if something was moving below them. By morning, fresh cracks had appeared in the ice. It meant the ground beneath their camp was no longer stable. But no one had the strength to move. On the 10th day, hunger truly took hold. Hands began to tremble. Heads felt heavy. Clear thinking became difficult. One scientist accidentally dropped his food into the snow. The look on his face, pure terror, silenced everyone. No one said a word. They all understood now. Food was no longer just fuel. It was life. On the 12th day, Black began to weaken. His steps became unsteady. Dr. Allison confirmed what everyone feared. The cold and lack of calories were killing him. Black wasn't just a dog. He was their last warning system. On the 13th day, an engineer suggested a desperate move. They should return to Omega-12 and try to recover more supplies. Going down meant trusting cracked ice and unstable metal. But desperation won. 3 people descended using ropes. Inside there was darkness, groaning metal, structures screaming under crushing ice pressure. They managed to recover spare batteries and an additional radio. But as they climbed back out, one rope snapped. One scientist fell trapped below. His screams echoed upward through the ice. No one could reach him. The others stood frozen, listening in silence. That moment carved a permanent fracture into every soul at the camp. They were now 16. On the 14th day, the storm finally arrived. Winds reached speeds of nearly 200 kilometers per hour. The tents shook like paper. Everyone huddled inside. For 3 days, no one could step outside. During the 3rd night, one technician's condition suddenly worsened. By morning, he was dead. They didn't even have the strength to move his body far. They buried him beneath the snow, right beside the camp. When the storm finally ended on the 16th day, the world felt unfamiliar. Fresh snow covered everything. Old tracks were gone, landmarks erased. All sense of direction had vanished. And Antarctica stood silent once again. Watching. The maps were useless now. That same day, the communications officer delivered another crushing blow. The radio they had recovered could only receive signals, not transmit them. It felt like being struck with a hammer. On the 17th day, another mind began to fracture. Biologist Maya became convinced she could hear children laughing beneath the ice. She ran out of her tent in panic, and if Captain Hall hadn't grabbed her in time, she would have vanished into the white. Fear was no longer just outside them. It was growing inside their minds. On the 18th day, Black collapsed. He lay down in the snow and closed his eyes. Nova stayed beside him, unmoving. No one spoke, but everyone understood. This was the beginning of the end. On the 19th day, Captain Richard Hall called the hardest meeting of his life. Rations would barely last 10 more days. There was still no rescue. Only 2 options remained: stay and die slowly, or risk everything and attempt to walk toward an abandoned research zone. Arguments erupted. Voices rose. Accusations were made. In the end, no decision was reached because no one wanted to carry that responsibility. That night, another person froze to death in their sleep. They were now 14. On the morning of the 20th day, Nova stood alone. Black's body was frozen solid. The doctor lowered her head. The loss of the dog wasn't just emotional. It meant their final early warning system was gone. Every step forward was now blind. Captain Hall's voice remained firm, but for the first time, fear was clearly visible in his eyes. He gathered everyone and said, "If we don't decide now, this ice will take us one by one." In that moment, they realized something terrifying. They weren't just losing to Antarctica. They were losing to time. After the 20th day, the difference between morning and night disappeared. The sun became nothing more than a pale line in the sky. The light in people's eyes faded into emptiness. Finally, Captain Hall made the call. They would not wait any longer. 320 kilometers away was an abandoned Soviet-era research station marked on old maps as Vostok Outpost. Maybe there would be a radio, maybe food, maybe just walls to block the wind, but it was their last hope. Out of 14, only 9 were still able to walk. The rest were crippled by frostbite or broken mentally. Dr. Allison stated it clearly: anyone who couldn't walk could not come. The decision was made without words. Those staying behind were given extra food and a small radio receiver. No one said goodbye. Everyone knew this was the last time they would see each other. On the 21st morning, the 9 survivors stepped into the frozen ocean of white. Each of them carried death on their backs. For the first 2 days, their bodies moved, but their minds slowly went numb. On the 3rd day, one scientist sat down and refused to stand again. Captain Hall tried to pull him up. Through tears, the man said he couldn't take another step. Moments later, he froze where he sat. No one turned back. On the 4th day, food was almost gone. They sucked snow to create water. On the 5th day, the line between human and animal began to blur. On the 6th day, a storm struck. They were forced to set up a tent while still moving. That night, one man tried to steal another's food. They fought and both fell into a hidden ice crevasse. By morning, there was only silence. Only 5 remained: Captain Hall, Dr. Allison, Maya, Engineer Thomas, and Nova, the last dog. On the 7th day, Maya collapsed. Her legs had turned black. She held the doctor's hand and asked to be left behind. Captain Hall refused. Maya smiled and said, "Someone always has to stay so others can move forward." They laid her gently on the ice and walked on. On the 8th day, Engineer Thomas lost direction. By the time they realized, it was too late. The cold took him quietly. Now there were only 3 humans and 1 dog. On the 9th day, Captain Hall collapsed. His breathing broke apart. He told the doctor that if she stopped, they would all die. For the first time, his voice trembled. Dr. Allison moved forward, crying. On the 10th day, a broken structure appeared in the distance. Vostok Outpost. Hope lasted only seconds. Inside, they found ruins. Fire damage. A burned radio. Rotten supplies. No help. That night, Captain Hall quietly opened his journal and wrote one final line: "We came very far." But maybe not far enough. He never woke up. Dr. Allison and Nova were alone. She knew she didn't have much time left. With her last strength, she repaired the old radio and sent an SOS signal. She sat and waited. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, a faint sound. A satellite receiver had picked up the signal. Dr. Allison smiled and lay down in the snow. When the rescue helicopter arrived hours later, they found only Nova alive. Beside her lay the frozen body of Dr. Allison. The official report later stated that Project Black Ice was a failure, but the truth was different. Antarctica didn't defeat them. It only reminded humanity how small it truly is. And even today, when someone walks across that frozen silence, the wind still whispers, some places are not meant to be conquered, only understood.